What is up, Packer fans? Happy Sunday. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. The 2024 NFL Draft is officially in the books. We now get prepared for the 2025 draft in Green Bay, which still feels incredibly crazy to say. But Green Bay wrapped up a really impressive draft. We'll talk about some of the ebbs and flows that draft weekend took, some of the real positive takes, some of the things that are maybe a little bit more interesting, but this is going to be our full recap of what happened all throughout the weekend. Before we get there, I just want to say thank you. These past couple weeks, from doing the live Q&A at the Timber Rattlers Stadium and for the Timber Rattlers game, and how many people showed up, and doing all of that was incredible. All the live Q&As this weekend, the live draft shows, being able to go to Badger State Brewery and meet a bunch of you guys, and the turnout there was just incredible. Just everything has been amazing. The numbers on the YouTube channel, the numbers on the audio channel have just been through the roof. And I just cannot thank you guys enough. Getting to do this full time is my absolute dream. And it is a absolute joy to be able to talk Packers with you guys 365 days a year. This is one of the most fun, if not like the most fun time of the entire year, going over all the draft stuff. Hope springs eternal. But you guys really made it that much more special. I had so much fun this weekend. I'm on zero sleep. I am, caffeine and energy drinks pulsing through my veins. And I still like the amount of fun that this weekend was, just chatting football with you guys, chatting with the Pack-A-Day members that joined me on the team on Thursday and Friday night, just all of it. It was an unbelievably fun weekend. And when you usually work like 20 to 22 hours a day sometimes, that's usually not a lot of fun. And this was just an absolute blast. And that is all due to you guys. So thank you so incredibly much. If you did enjoy it, if you had fun as well, if you're considering maybe supporting the podcast or myself in some way, shape, or form, the simplest thing you can do is just subscribe. Whether you're on the audio channel or on the video, just hit the subscribe button. That it doesn't cost you anything. It just takes one click and it helps the channel out so much. So that's the easiest way. If you're interested, check out those Pack-A-Day Podcast YouTube memberships. And of course, if you're on a channel where you can give a review or a 5-star rating, definitely do that as well. All those things are super helpful to myself and the channel. But we've got a draft to cover. So let's go over it. Let's go right away into what happened. And we'll start actually on day 3. If you want some of the day 1 and day 2 takeaways, I did do full episodes on those that you can check out already. I am going to do a huge recap as well, but just a high level recap of what day 3 brought for Green Bay. They started in round 4. They were back towards the end of round 4 to start the day, and certainly something a lot of people, myself included, hypothesized was that Green Bay would be aggressive in moving up in round 4. They hadn't really been aggressive in moving up until that point. They moved down with the Edgerrin Cooper trade, picked up a couple additional draft picks, but the beginning of round 4, where you're the top 100 picks are gone, and you might have some guys that are still high on your board, but you probably need to get to the beginning of round 4 before that cliff really falls off. I was very much expecting Goody to move up, and that's exactly what he did. He moved from pick 126 to 111. He gave up pick 190, a 6th-round pick, in order to do so. And with that selection, he took Evan Williams, the safety out of Oregon. Some interesting choices there, right? I don't know if he has the benefit of hindsight, if he would have done anything different. My guess is probably not. Remember, he was at pick 126. 2 very popular players in draft circles. TJ Tampa would have been there at pick 130. Jaden Hicks would have been there at pick 133. Those are all the sort of things that I know people get frustrated at in the moment. There's always going to be these. And if you go back in time, there are players that, Green Bay thought, or fans thought, that Green Bay reached on through the course of a draft, and they ended up being really good players. There are other times where, how many times have we discussed the TJ Watt thing? Like 1,000,001 times, if not more than that. Like, these are always the things that are going to happen. And sometimes Goody and the GM get it right. Sometimes the consensus draft board and the draft nerds on the internet get it right. But these are the fun stories that, I don't know, maybe again, there's some angst and frustration on the day of the draft. For me personally, I just like tracking those things over time and seeing, all right, what could they have done different? What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And the truth of the matter is, on day 3 of the draft, the vast majority of the picks are wrong. Like, there are not always a lot of players that end up being anything in day 3. And if anything, the Packers, more than any other team, deserve the benefit of the doubt, because you don't have to go further than last year. And you can just go all through the course of time with the Zach Toms, the Dontavian Wickses, the TJ Langs, the Mark Tauschers, that we can go on forever, where Green Bay finds all of these talented players on day 3 of the draft. So hopefully this was another instance. Whether or not Evan Williams is one of those, or if he's more on the Jamon Moore or one of those players that maybe they reached a little bit for, who knows? But that's the fun part of the draft, at least for me, is tracking it through the years. And of course, no matter who they picked, as Packer fans, we are hoping that they succeed and that Goody ultimately got it right. But again, Evan Williams at pick 111 after moving up from pick 126. Then in the 5th round, they traded up again, going from pick 168 to 163. They gave up pick 219 as well. They got Jacob Monk, the offensive lineman out of Duke. A lot of people thought the Packers were going to take an offensive lineman out of Duke potentially in this draft. It is not Graham Barton. It is Jacob Monk. He's a really fun player on tape. We'll go over, if you want to, at the end of this episode, I will go through some brief scouting reports for all of the day 3 guys, which I haven't really done in a recap episode yet, other than the quick reaction ones. So if you want to stick around to the end of the episode, I will give some scouting reports for these. Of course, you guys know I'm going to do deep dives into all of these players. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it here today, because in the next 2 weeks, pretty much every single day is going to be dedicated to one of these prospects and going into the greatest detail that you could possibly imagine. But again, if you want to stick around to the end, I will give some of the quick breakdowns and scouting reports for all of these day 3 players. But Jacob Monk in round 5, after trading up and again giving up pick 219 in order to do so. In round 5, then after taking Jacob Monk, they took Kitano Ladapo, the safety out of Oregon State. So they now tripled up at safety at that point. In the 6th round, they selected offensive tackle Travis Glover out of Georgia State, their 3rd offensive lineman at that point. And then 2 really fun picks in the 7th round, quarterback Michael Pratt out of Tulane and corner Kalen King out of Penn State. I love those 2 7th round picks for a variety of different reasons, but what you're looking for is, in a way, you're just kind of looking for some fun prospects that maybe find a way to hit. And if they do, they actually have some legitimate upside. And that's exactly what they got here. Michael Pratt out of Tulane, a lot of people had in their top 100 on the draft board. So again, these are always the things, right? If they would have taken Michael Pratt in that Evan Williams pick at pick 111, people probably would have said, like, all right, do they really need a quarterback at that point? I think people maybe still would have not been happy with a quarterback at pick 111. But based on consensus draft boards, Michael Pratt could have gone there and nobody would have batted an eye in general. I'm not saying for the Packers, but right around that time in the draft, and most people have been like, yeah, that makes sense. That's where he could go. He instead falls to round 7. So these are all things that, hey, maybe they reached a little bit for a guy like Evan Williams, but they also had a guy like Michael Pratt, who a lot of people had in their top 100, fall to them at the end of the 7th round. And then they get Kalen King. And Kalen King is such an interesting story, because at this time last year, a year ago today, Kalen King was considered to be maybe the consensus number 1 corner in this draft for 2024, and at least was considered in that conversation, or at bare minimum, a 1st round pick in 2024. 2024 did not go Kalen King's way. He had poor tape. He tested poorly. He did not live up to the hype. And sometimes when the hype is here, there is only one way to go. But he did fall off pretty significantly. Cornerback is a position that's extremely volatile. And we've seen that even through the years with some of the Green Bay corners, where sometimes they play great, sometimes they don't play as well. It is an extremely volatile position. Green Bay has made a living off of taking guys who have been better in previous seasons. Dontavian Wicks a season ago was such a great example of that. To a pretty decent size extent, Jordan Love was an example of that. So sometimes if they show the propensity to be a really good player at some point in their college career, even if it wasn't the most recent year, Green Bay really likes that, and they've had a lot of success in taking players that way. Tyron Hopper is actually another example of that, who had a much better 2022 than he did at 2023. We'll see if Green Bay can get the 2022 version of Tyron Hopper and Kalen King, and if they did, first of all, I think Hopper is, well within the realm of going in the top 3 rounds if he plays like he did in 2022. And Kalen King, they might have got a 1st round caliber player if he goes back to playing like he did in 2022. So that is the interesting aspect, and I love the Michael Pratt and Kalen King picks on late day 3. So what was Green Bay able to accomplish overall in this draft? They got 3 offensive linemen. They got 3 safeties. They got 2 linebackers, a running back, a quarterback, and a cornerback. And I think one of the big trends of this draft was that they really took for need. These were all the top ones here were large positions of need. 3 offensive linemen. I talked about all offseason. I thought offensive lineman was the biggest need. They needed to get some bodies there. They needed to get some competition. I still have a little bit of trepidation of where this offensive line stands right now. And my reasoning for that is, listen, the end of the season last year, they basically are returning their starting 5. The John Runyon Jr., Sean Ryan rotation at right guard is the only thing that's missing. But if you just put Sean Ryan in that spot for John Runyon Jr., you're returning Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Sean Ryan, and Zach Tom. And that offensive line played very well towards the end of last season, protected Jordan Love. Aaron Jones was successful in the running game. We saw a little bit of everything. So your baseline here is still pretty good based on what we saw at the end of last season. So you're not super concerned. Then they go out and they get Jordan Morgan to be potentially a starter, of course, but at least now you've got 6 guys that you feel pretty comfortable with. And on no matter what, after getting Morgan and 2 guys in round 4 and round 5, you're going to feel better, or round 4 and round 6, excuse me. You're going to feel better about the depth in the offensive line. And that's important, but I still wonder from a starting standpoint, I still kind of only really, truly, totally trust Elton Jenkins and Zach Tom. Josh Myers, still completely inconsistent and up and down. Sean Ryan, I don't have a full faith in yet. I still think he's going to take a jump in year 3 here, and I'm hoping that he can prove to be a starter, but I still have some question marks. I actually really like Rasheed Walker, but the Packers have said over and over that they need him to take another step if he wants to be a long-term tackle, and they just drafted a left tackle in the first round. That's going to be an interesting dynamic there. But then, Jordan Morgan, well, I'm hopeful, first-round pick, somebody that can come in and potentially play right away. What is he going to be like in year 1? If you have one player go down, you still probably feel pretty good about your offensive line. If you have 2 players go down, who's the next man up? Royce Newman, Andre Dillard, Luke Tenuta, Caleb Jones? Is it going to be Jacob Monk? Is it going to be Travis Glover, Kadeem Telford? You're 2 injuries away in an extremely long season from having an offensive line that still has some question marks. And even if everyone stays healthy, Rasheed Walker, Sean Ryan, Josh Myers still have some question marks. Jordan Morgan still has some question marks. So they're in a better position clearly after the draft. I like the signing of Dillard. It's literally a 0 risk signing prior to the draft. They still have some players that I think can take a step. They really liked Luke Tenuta a couple seasons ago prior to the injury. We'll see if he can bounce back. We'll see if, now is kind of a now or never for Caleb Jones. And they just drafted 3 players. So they did address that position. I did think maybe it would be even a little bit more aggressive, and we'll see. Maybe they still sign someone. Who knows? But it's in a much better position today than it was prior to the draft starting, and that's a really positive direction still for Green Bay. They draft 3 safeties. The makeover at safety is unbelievable. They go from Darnell Savage and Jonathan Owens and Rudy Ford and Dallin Levitt. All of them are gone. All of those veteran safeties are gone. Tavarius Moore, they signed at the beginning of last year. He didn't even make it through training camp. And in their place, Xavier McKinney, and then 3 safeties in the draft, including Javon Bullard in the 2nd round, Evan Williams in the 4th, and then Kitano Ladapo in the 5th round. And I believe that, especially Kitano Ladapo in the 5th round, when I put my scouting report together for him, I thought he could be a spot starter as a rookie. Not an ideal starter, but a spot starter as a rookie. They didn't have many spot starters on the entire roster at safety last year. We'll see what Evan Williams can bring to the table. He was a standout at the Senior Bowl. Per Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl, who puts it all together, he said there were a lot of teams that were really in on Evan Williams in the 4th round, and he basically presupposed that's why Green Bay was aggressive in moving up for him. And then Javon Bullard, getting him in the 2nd round, a lot of people had him as the top safety in this entire draft. So Green Bay did a great job, not only in free agency with McKinney, but in the draft of completely making over that safety room. They get 2 linebackers, one in the 2nd round, one in the 3rd. We knew they were going to have to put bodies at this position, but you wondered, were they going to maybe wait until day 3 and try to take somebody that could maybe be that spot starter there? No, they go aggressive. They get Edgerrin Cooper to start next to Quay Walker. They get, in my opinion, a Tyron Hopper who has the ability to at least compete, if nothing else, with Isaiah McDuffie for that number 3. And even if he doesn't beat out McDuffie's an eventual free agent, and Hopper could be that 3 long-term. And even if that doesn't happen, he's still a core special teams guy. He's going to provide depth at the position that they just did not have going into the weekend. We knew that they needed a change of pace at running back. They get that in Marshawn Lloyd, somebody that is a different flavor of running back from Josh Jacobs, Emmanuel Wilson, A.J. Dillon. And that was something that they needed, more playmaking, 7 yards per carry this past season. They probably should have given him the ball more. He doesn't have a ton of wear and tear on his body. This was a really smart running back pickup on day 2 of the draft. And then, like I said, a couple players with a little bit more fun and just taking a flyer on a couple guys. Quarterback, Michael Pratt in corner, Kalen King. These were, again, sort of flyer picks at the end of round 7. The corner position, though, is certainly a position where you could have used more competition. So what didn't they do? They did not draft a wide receiver, did not draft a tight end, did not draft a defensive end / edge rusher, and did not draft a defensive tackle. So why was that? Why did they not draft those positions? We talked about all along at wide receiver, there's just a law of diminishing returns. You've got Malik Heath as your number 6 right now. You've got Samori Toure fighting for tooth and nail to try to get back on the 53. And you still have a guy like Grant Dubose, who you just spent a 7th round pick on a season ago, who I still think has some talent. And remember, got activated off the practice squad towards the end of last season. I think they have 8 guys that are 53-man roster capable players. I think 6 of those probably make it. And you still have some injury, depth if somebody does get hurt. Malik Heath couldn't even get active in the playoffs. Like, that's where things were at. And that's when Samori Toure was on IR and Malik Heath still could not get active. So they have plenty of wide receivers. They have wide receivers that all need space to grow. And that's the big thing for me when people are saying they need to pick up a number 1 or they need to still take another guy in the draft. I just never saw it that way, because in order to have these guys get to the level that they need to, Goody's always talked about these guys need opportunities to play and go out and continue to grow and prove themselves. If you want a number 1 wide receiver, rather than trading for one or rather than trying to draft one, I am much more of the mind of let's give Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, and Jaden Reed the opportunity to grow into that number 1 wide receiver. And I think multiple of those wide receivers have the ability to do so. Not to mention, you still have a guy too like Bo Melton, who I think is super talented. I just think those guys need the space in the room to grow, not bringing in a veteran to put in front of them, not putting another wide receiver that's going to take more of their snaps. Those are the core that you have that's already super talented. They need the ball. They need the opportunity. And unless you got somebody that was just a no-brainer and you couldn't pass on it, it always made more sense just to kind of keep the group that you had right now. They're all young. They're all talented. Keep it as is. Tight end, sort of a similar situation. You've got Luke Musgrave. You've got Tucker Kraft, you've got Ben Sims. They don't really, and even like a Tyler Davis, who I know is everyone's favorite, but he's a core special teamer that has a legitimate opportunity to make this team as a tight end just based on special teams. He was their number 1 special teams player prior to the injury a season ago, played the most snaps. So you don't really have this glaring hole. The H-back fullback spot, in my opinion, can be filled by guys like Tucker Kraft and Ben Sims. You don't need a dedicated player. We barely even saw that position used towards the end of last season. So I don't think they really needed that. It was a position that you just need, again, the opportunity for Kraft and Musgrave and Sims to grow, and don't put anything in their way. Defensive end. This was a really tough year for defensive ends in the draft for Green Bay's type of players. This is why I was so high on the potential of Marshawn Kneeland for Green Bay. Not necessarily because I was in love with Marshawn Kneeland as a pick necessarily, but because he was kind of the only defensive end in like the first 4 rounds, other than maybe like a Jared Verse or a Dallas Turner really early in the draft, who were gone by the time the Packers picked in the first round, that actually fit what Green Bay usually likes at that edge rusher position. And if they didn't get him, you sort of saw it going of like, yeah, they could take a flyer on a guy in the 6th or 7th round, but there were just very few Packers types at defensive end. Not to mention, we found out some really good news about Kingsley Enagbare that we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And then defensive tackle. This is another one that they didn't address, and I talked about this quite a bit prior to the draft. This was a 3-technique defensive tackle draft. A ton of guys 295 and under, maybe 300 dripping wet. But they did not have the big, bulky, physical guys. So why does that matter? It matters because they have 3 young 3-techniques that are already able to play at that position in Carl Brooks, Colby Wooden, and Devontae Wyatt. Furthermore, they have a Lucas Van Ness who can kick inside and play there a little bit as well. And Kenny Clark can play there as well with Slayton at the other spot. They've got 5 guys who are more than capable of playing 3 technique at a pretty decent level, if not a very high level in the NFL. They don't need that particular type of player. The player they potentially need is more of that run stopper, the bigger, more physical guy, because Kenny Clark and TJ Slayton are both free agents as of right now going into next season. But unless you drafted T'Vondre Sweat, there just were not a lot of those people. It's another reason why Mason Smith was somebody that I thought could be an option for Green Bay in round 2 or round 3, because he at least was 6'5", like 305. He at least had a little bit more mass and bulk, but it was really sort of T'Vondre Sweat or bust. And a lot of people thought maybe Sweat was going to go 3rd or 4th round. The only opportunity that the Packers had to take T'Vondre Sweat was if they took him in the 1st round. He was gone before 41, before Green Bay even traded down in round 2. And I don't think they were ever going to take him in round 2, much less round 1. So they just didn't have that type of player. So there are legitimate reasons why Green Bay avoided wide receiver, tight end, defensive end, and defensive tackle. So the other one is corner. They drafted 1 corner, last pick that they had, Kalen King. Why didn't they not attack that more aggressively? That was a question that I saw quite a bit throughout the weekend. I've said a variety of different things here. The first thing I'll say is I do wish they kind of would have. I do wish they maybe would have spent a little bit more time, effort, and energy in trying to get a player on day 2, early day 3 that maybe could bring a little bit more competition there. But I think there are some reasons why they may not have done that. The first is that this is Jeff Hafley's defense now. Forever, at least for the past 2-3 seasons, I have heard over and over and over that the reasons that the corners are not playing well is not because the corners are not good. It's because Joe Barry didn't know how to use them. It's because he was using them in passive roles, playing them in off coverage when these were meant to be more aggressive press man cover corners. We are about to find out. If that was your belief, that Joe Barry was using the corners wrong, my belief is that Jeff Hafley is going to use them in an entirely different way. So hopefully, quote unquote, use them right. And hopefully that unlocks Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Carrington Valentine, who all probably should be more up closer to the line of scrimmage and playing a more aggressive brand of football. So that might be a part of it right there. The second is that they went and got a safety in Xavier McKinney, who I think is going to be able to erase some of those mistakes on the back end. And I think even give those corners a little bit more confidence because they know they have Xavier McKinney behind them. And I think that could cause those corners to play with a bit more aggression and a bit more confidence. I think that could unlock the cornerback group. The next is because you have Jair at 1 corner. You have Keyshawn Nixon that you just gave a brand new deal to in the slot. You have Eric Stokes and Carrington Valentine, and to some extent too, Corey Ballantyne, to compete for that other starting spot. And whichever 2 don't win it, they are now your depth pieces at corner. You have a special teams guy like a Robert Rochelle as your number 6 if you need him. They kept him back this season. And if you usually that number 6 guy is a special teams guy and or a developmental guy and sort of a break glass in case of emergency guy, Robert Rochelle could theoretically be that. Now they have a Kalen King as well, who has played some special teams, who could potentially be that developmental corner. So a group of corners that consists of Jair Alexander, Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon, Eric Stokes, Corey Ballantyne, and Kalen King, you're not keeping probably more than 6. Add on top of that you've got Javon Bullard, who might be able to be a player in the slot for them as well, and that adds more versatility to your defensive backfield. They did sort of address it with Kalen King and Javon Bullard in a sort of 1.5 corners extent. Now, whether that's good enough, whether you'd like to have more competition, maybe, but they did say that Eric Stokes is healthy and ready to go. And hopefully that is able to get him playing at the level that he needs to. Those are all things that we're going to have to monitor, but you can sort of understand why maybe they weren't more aggressive. Even if you disagree with it, Green Bay had opportunities to address corner. Cooper DeJean in round 1, if they would have viewed him as a corner, we don't know. But if they did, they passed on him in round 1. They had the opportunity to take Kool-Aid McKinstry in round 1 and round 2. Jarian Jones, the 3rd round corner who they brought in for a free agent visit, was there when they took Hopper. They took Hopper instead of Jarian Jones. They had multiple opportunities to take corners in this draft, and they're like, no, we're good. Right or wrong, we'll see. But they clearly had those opportunities, passed on them, and I do think some of the depth that they have on the roster, bringing in a new defensive coordinator and a style of defense and having Xavier McKinney behind them, bringing in a Kalen King and a Javon Bullard, I'm still not fully convinced that this is a perfectly well-functioning cornerback group, but it's still improved, and I am excited to see them in this new defense with Xavier McKinney behind him. Some other takeaways. I talked a little bit prior to the draft of like if Green Bay was creative, they might have been able to get maybe like the top center, the top linebacker, the top safety, the top running back in the draft, depending on how they maneuvered things. Well, they didn't quite do that, but they did get the number one consensus linebacker in the draft. They got Daniel Jeremiah's number one rated running back. They got Mel Kiper's number one rated safety. They got Dane Brugler's number one rated long snapper. More on that later. And they got Dane Brugler's number two rated guard, who will be a tackle to start off with, but he was still the number two guard for Dane Brugler. So those draft experts, and just in general, hard to argue that they, at least from a, scouting standpoint, or like a pre-draft standpoint, Edgerrin Cooper was pretty much everyone's number one running back or linebacker, and Junior Colson. But I think he was the only guy that went in round 2 at linebacker. There's no linebackers round 1. I think Cooper was the only one in round 2. I think Colson went round 3. Peyton Wilson went round 3. I don't think any other linebackers went round 2. So clearly Edgerrin Cooper was the consensus number 1 linebacker. Again, Marshawn Lloyd was Daniel Jeremiah's number 1 running back. Javon Bullard was Mel Kiper's number 1 safety. They got a long snapper and undrafted free agency that we'll talk about. And then Jordan Morgan was Dane Brugler's number 2 guard. So they did attack some of those positions. And it is an interesting dynamic that 4 different positions that they got maybe the number 1 guy at and another one that they got the number 2 guy at. There were some themes that were very prevalent in this draft. I went over one of these the other day, but I think there's even a couple other things we need to look at. Of all the talk of how Goody's lying to us, Goody told us exactly what he was going to do in this draft. He said, I have a lot of picks and I want to use them all. And he had 11 picks going in. He did do some maneuvering. He got 2 picks and then moved up with 2 picks and he ended up back with 11, but he took 11 picks. He made 3 different trades in the draft. People asked me before the draft, over, under 10.5 picks. I said over. They said over, under 2 trades. I said over. And that's exactly what we saw. But he told us he was going to use all of these picks. He said he maybe even wanted more. He used all 11 and he told us exactly what he was going to do. He told us that he wanted competition at everywhere, at all of these positions. Well, quarterback, he took one to, battle with Sean Clifford for that number 2 quarterback position. Running back, he got a new player in that room to compete with the, certainly not Josh Jacobs, but with A.J. Dillon, Emmanuel Wilson in that backup running back spot. Wide receiver, there's already plenty of competition. The tight ends, Musgrave and Kraft, maybe not competing with each other, but maybe competing for that sort of number 1 spot, if you will. He added 3 offensive linemen to compete along the offensive line, along with Andre Dillard. Defensive line, again, I don't know that there's necessarily competition there for roster spots. Maybe Jonathan Ford can fight for one. Maybe they'll pick up another player, but there certainly is competition for who's going to get the most snaps along the defensive line. Edge rusher, sort of same thing with the players they got. They didn't draft anyone, but there's plenty of competition for who's going to be the starters, who's going to get the most snaps between LVN and Gary. And we just know there's going to be a pretty much a big rotation there, but there's certainly a lot of competition still towards the back end of that position. Linebacker, they add 2 guys that are going to add to the competition there. Corner, we just talked about, Kalen King, and at safety, they added like 1,000 safeties. So he is adding competition. He even added competition at long snapper. He added competition at kicker earlier this offseason. As of right now, there's 3 kickers on this roster. I do believe they brought in a punter for a rookie tryout. They didn't sign an undrafted punter yet, but brought one in for a rookie minicamp tryout. There is competition everywhere. He told us that ahead of time, and he went out and he did it. He told us that he wanted to get back to drafting a quarterback in pretty much every draft and, giving himself that sort of lottery ticket. And what did he do? He went out, he got a quarterback on his second to last pick in the draft in Michael Pratt. He told us exactly what he was looking for at linebacker, somebody that could play all the positions, be super versatile, be somebody that him and Quay could do a little bit of everything. What did he do? He got Edgerrin Cooper to that exact definition. He told us at safety, he said, I'm not looking for a box safety. I'm not looking for a post safety. I'm not looking for a slot safety. I want somebody who can do it all. Javon Bullard, what he can do? He can do it all. They didn't draft a Jaden Hicks. They didn't draft a traditional box safety. They drafted Javon Bullard, who could be post safety, 2-high safety, slot safety, box safety. He could do all of it, along with Xavier McKinney. They've got versatility there. He told us on the offensive line that he was looking for players who had all that versatility, could play any spot along the offensive line, and they could move around, and that they've had great success with that. What did they do? They drafted 3 offensive linemen with versatility, including Jordan Morgan in the first round. For all the talk of like, hey, GMs are lying and Brian Gutekunst isn't always going to, he told us everything. He basically drew us a treasure map of like, here's what I'm going to do all throughout the draft. Have at it. You can think that I'm lying, but I'm just telling you right to your face exactly what I'm going to do through the entirety of the draft. And he did it. Some other themes in this draft. They went for the Packer people, the locker room guys, the team captains. Jordan Morgan, team captain. Kitano Oladapo, team captain. Tyron Hopper, team captain. Jacob Monk, team captain. Evan Williams was not a captain at Oregon. He just got there for the 1 year. He was a 3-time captain at Fresno State. Michael Pratt, team captain. Javon Bullard was not a captain, but was very specifically mentioned by a couple different people, a locker room leader within that Georgia team and within that Georgia defense. He was also a captain in high school. Marshawn Lloyd, a captain in high school. Kalen King, a 2-time captain in high school. So they brought in a ton of guys that are high character, team captains or high school team captains, locker room leaders. Apparently Jordan Morgan, and I think it was Jacob Monk as well, but maybe it was the other offensive tackle whose name is escaping me, Travis Glover. Those guys are apparently like weight room warriors and are like just living in the weight room. They got guys that are going to fit in this locker room. That was clearly something that was still extremely important to Brian Gutekunst. Versatility was another theme in this draft. Jordan Morgan, multiple spots along the offensive line. Edgerrin Cooper can play all those linebacker positions and has that versatility to sort of switch off with Quay Walker. Javon Bullard, we talked about, all that versatility. Evan Williams has had some versatility in college with the way that he played safety. Jacob Monk, versatility along the offensive line. Kitano Oladapo, same thing as Evan Williams. I don't think to the same extent as Javon Bullard. There's probably a little bit more of a limit there, but being able to play some in the post, some in the too high, and some in the box, they still have that versatility there. Let's see here. Travis Glover, versatility along the offensive line. And to some extent, Kalen King, who's only a corner, a lot of people thought that Kalen King might need to ultimately transition to safety. So even if he doesn't work at corner, he might have some ability to transition to that safety role, or maybe at least at a minimum could be like an emergency safety if you absolutely needed him to be. A ton of versatility within this draft. Senior Bowl was another one. Jordan Morgan, Senior Bowl. Javon Bullard, Senior Bowl. Marshawn Lloyd, Evan Williams, Kitano Oladapo, Michael Pratt, Kalen King, Travis Glover. 8 of their 11 draft picks were at the Senior Bowl. Meanwhile, Evan Williams, Javon Bullard, both were the Defensive Player of the Week for their respective teams at the Senior Bowl. So this was something that I think Goody said in his press conference that, hey, it just kind of happenstance. Jim Nagy does a great job of putting these rosters together. It's not necessarily something they're targeting. Maybe not, but it has definitely been a trend as of late that Green Bay has drafted a ton of players from the Senior Bowl. Relative athletic scores. We did all the stuff beforehand, and there's the big, the RAS wars of 2024 and what Green Bay is looking for. They took 3 players that had a relative athletic score over 9. 8 of the 11 had a relative athletic score over 8. 9 of the 11 had a relative athletic score over 7, and 10 of the 11 had a relative athletic score over 6. The only 3 that had a relative athletic score under 8 were Tyron Hopper, who had a 7.42, and Green Bay did mention that they had some different testing numbers for him, that he actually ran faster, which probably could have pushed that actually above an 8 if they had a couple of, I know they said that the 40 was like legitimately different, so those things actually could have pushed it up even more. Kalen King had a 6.68 and Travis Glover had a 4.71. And I talk about all the time for the big heavy dudes that are like 330 plus, it's tough a lot of times to get that RAS really high. 471 is not a bad score for him, but those are the only 3 that had under 8, and Hopper with those numbers that Green Bay had might have actually also been over 8. The average relative athletic score for the Packers draft picks was an 8.04. So they went pretty aggressive on ultra athletes once again. Special teams was another trend. Edgerrin Cooper actually had vast special team experience. Javon Bullard had special teams experience. Marshawn Lloyd did not at all, but Goody in his press conference mentioned that they think he can be a kick returner utilizing him in that way. And with the new kick return rules, a lot of people have made the prediction that the punt return types, the guys that are like sort of like shifty and are going to take time to go like left and right a little bit are not going to work with the new kick return rules. And a lot of people actually think that it is going to be running backs that are going to be best because you're actually going to be reading blocks. You're actually going to be able to need that running back vision. And a lot of people think with the new kick return rules that running backs are going to be the ones that ultimately end up doing this. You're also probably going to have two guys back kick returning. So even if Keyshawn Nixon is one, you need the other one. Marshawn Lloyd could potentially be that player. Tyron Hopper is going to be a core special teamer. Evan Williams and Kitano Oladapo are going to be core special teamers. And Kalen King has some special teams ability as well. So special teams, a huge theme in this draft also. Really the only guys that kind of didn't were the quarterback and the offensive linemen. And offensive linemen are still, maybe they're on the protection units or whatever, but still a big special teams presence. I thought they also did a really interesting job drafting attacking players, specifically on defense. But even Jordan Morgan and Travis Glover, to an extent, are sort of attacking players that aren't willing or aren't afraid to get to that second level and attack. But specifically on defense, Edgerrin Cooper, attacking physical player, runs downhill. Javon Bullard, same thing from that safety. One of the first things that jumped off tape was his ability, that 4.4 40, playing from the deep half and sprinting forward, playing downhill and playing an aggressive brand of football. Tyron Hopper at linebacker. Yeah, he might struggle a little bit in coverage, but he's not afraid to come forward, hit the guard, hit the tight end, hit the fullback, whoever he needs to hit, he's going to hit him. Running back in the backfield, he's an attacking linebacker. Evan Williams, the safety. Kitano Oladapo, the safety. Both attacking players, both good blitzers. If you want to know, or at least get a first inkling of what style of defense that Jeff Hafley wants to play, well, when given the opportunity to draft new players for this defense, they went pretty heavy on attacking, physical, downhill players. I don't think we're going to see the Joe Barry 30 yards off the line of scrimmage and now let's go forward and make everything in front of us. This is going to be a much more attacking defense, and they got attacking players in this draft. Where the roster stands right now, I like what they did overall, filling a lot of their needs. We talked about offensive line a little bit, where maybe there's a little bit of an opportunity there, but otherwise, you went into the draft with some potential glaring holes. Offensive line, one of those. Safety, linebacker, backup running back. I think he filled every single one of those needs. We'll see if he has anything in free agency that he still wants to try to accomplish. I have a feeling they're going to get through OTAs and mini camps, evaluate everything and see where they're at. Maybe at training camp, if there's an injury, if they're just feeling a little bit weak at a certain spot, maybe they try to get something, but he really did a fantastic job of filling every single need with a lot of numbers in this draft. And they really did a nice job too of, they lost some of those core special teams guys. The Rudy Ford, Nixon might not be able to do as much because he's still a core defender. Dallin Levitt got cut midway through last season. Going out and getting a lot of guys who are core special teamers in this draft should really help out Rich Bisaccia in a major way as well. All right. A couple notes from the press conferences. One of the interesting ones, Jacob Monk, Brian Gutekunst, he said they moved up for him, or they did move up for him. We knew that. But the reason why is he said everyone in that room wanted to acquire Jacob Monk. So it seems like there was a pretty large contingent of scouts and, personnel people, and of course, Goody himself, that wanted to make sure that they got Jacob Monk, which is why they went up and moved up for him. Like I said, at first glance on his tape was really fun, really exciting, and I'm really excited to do the deep dive on him. Meanwhile, the other big noteworthy aspect of press conferences, Kingsley Enagbare apparently did not tear his ACL. Now, he still has an ACL injury. It seems like, I know they said he didn't have surgery yet, but it seems like what they're trying to do is have it heal on its own, maybe do some physical therapy sort of stuff where he doesn't have to have surgery, which would not knock him out for an extended period of time. But it does sound like there are still some hurdles that Enagbare is going to have to get over, and it didn't feel like they kind of ruled out anything quite yet. But this is probably a little bit risky because if all of a sudden they do realize that he does need surgery, it's going to set things back even more. But apparently they got really good news on it. It was not a fully torn ACL, and they're not doing any surgery yet. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that is great news for Enagbare, and he can be back sooner rather than later. And then they did also confirm, at least Matt LaFleur did, that Jordan Morgan will start his career as a left tackle. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's his end position. They still probably are going to cross-train him at some point, but when they get him to Green Bay, they're going to begin him as a left tackle. Doesn't mean he's going to start left tackle to begin the season. There's still obviously Rasheed Walker there. We'll see what that means for Rasheed Walker and the rest of the offensive line, but they're going to start integrating Jordan Morgan at the left tackle position. Another noteworthy thing, Kalen King on the conference call said he was ultra motivated. You could tell he was extremely emotional that he went in the 7th round. You can imagine this kid was at one point, again, expected to be a 1st-round pick. He falls to the 3rd to last pick in the draft and a late 7th rounder. You could tell this kid is motivated. He's ready. I actually think that one of the best things that happened to him was exactly this. He's a chock full of talent sort of dude that was expected to be a 1st-round pick. If this is what he needs to have that chip on his shoulder and go be the best Kalen King possible, Green Bay could have really got a steal in the 7th round. Some jersey number info. We already knew Jordan Morgan got number 77. Edgerrin Cooper will wear number 56. I know a lot of people saw some Nick Barnett in Edgerrin Cooper. Well, maybe you see it a little bit more as he has that number 56 out there for Green Bay. Javon Bullard wearing number 20. Marshawn Lloyd, number 32. And Tyron Hopper will be number 59. No news yet on any of the day 3 picks. Green Bay signed a variety of undrafted free agents. We'll kind of go over that over time, but 2 I wanted to touch base on. Donovan Jennings, who was on my list of the top 25 most likely players to be selected by Green Bay or to become Green Bay Packers. They signed him to an undrafted free agent deal. They gave him $110,000 guaranteed, which in the scheme of signing bonuses for an undrafted free agent isn't massive. There'll be guys that get a lot more, but it's massive for Green Bay. They usually do not go big time undrafted free agent hunting and spend a ton of the money, and understandably so, because they usually do a great job of finding guys anyway, but they went out of their way to get Jennings. I actually really liked him. I think he's going to move from tackle to guard. He's like a 9.8 relative athletic score at guard, and I think he's going to have a real opportunity to make the roster. Again, Green Bay gave him that big signing bonus. This, to me, is almost like getting an extra 7th round pick. Really like that pickup. And then Peter Bowden, long snapper from Wisconsin. They gave him a signing bonus as well, and he will have every opportunity to earn that long snapper spot. Long snapper was an issue. Matt Orzik did not snap well a season ago, and I do believe Peter Bowden will get every opportunity to earn that spot. As I mentioned earlier, he was Dane Brugler's number 1 long snapper in his draft guide. I'm not going to do a deep dive on Peter Bowden. I still refuse to do long snapper breakdowns. I'm sorry. You'll have to forgive me. But I do think Peter Bowden will have a real legitimate chance to unseat Matt Orzik this offseason. Couple random thoughts. I was thinking about Michael Pratt and them getting him this season as a 7th round pick, somebody that has the potential to really develop. The reason I was thinking about it is we don't know how much longer Tom Clements is going to be quarterback's coach. Michael Pratt will get at least 1 season with Tom Clements. That is a big time thing for a young developmental quarterback to get to work with, in my opinion, one of the greatest quarterbacks coaches of all time. And next year's quarterback class is supposed to be a lot weaker, and they might not have Tom Clements for that next quarterback if they take somebody next year. So being able to get somebody like a Michael Pratt this year at the end of the 7th round and have him work with Tom Clements for at least a year, and hopefully Clements is here longer. We don't know. I'm not saying he's going to retire after the season, but you never quite know with where Clements is at in his career. And I think getting him in this quarterback room and getting that developmental quarterback now while Clements is still in the building is super important. And remember, they signed Sean Marion as well as an offensive assistant. He's going to work with the quarterbacks. I know Clements is still going to be very involved, obviously, with Jordan Love, and that's going to be his priority. But they also have Sean Mannion now to work with these quarterbacks as well. So we're going to get 3 young, talented quarterbacks in Jordan Love and Sean Clifford and in Michael Pratt that Tom Clements and Sean Mannion are going to get to work a lot with. And I think that's going to be super beneficial for Michael Pratt. And then the other thing is Rudy Ford. I saw people still asking about Rudy Ford. Well, now that the draft is over, will they go pick him up? Guys, they just drafted 3 safeties. They have those 3 rookie safeties. They signed Xavier McKinney. That's 4. Anthony Johnson Jr. is 5. Zane Anderson, who was on the roster all of last season once they acquired him, is 6. They also have Benny Sapp Jr., who also was on the 53-man roster at some point last year. That's 7. For anyone that was hoping for Rudy Ford, I'm sorry, your dream is over. Rudy Ford will not be coming back. That door is slammed shut with the drafting of 3 safeties. Rudy Ford is going to have to find a job somewhere else. So no, Rudy Ford will not be back with the Packers. Last but not least, from a draft standpoint here, before we get into those quick scouting reports, with the selection of Jacob Monk, the Aaron Rodgers trade is officially complete in the fact that we know the exact parameters and everything that happened with that trade. The Jets, remember, this was the trade. It was pick 15 in the draft, Aaron Rodgers, and pick 170 in the draft in 2023. So Aaron Rodgers, 2023 pick 15, and 2023 pick 170 for 2023 pick 13, 2023 pick 42, 2023 pick 207, and the conditional second first round pick that ultimately ended up being pick 41 in the second round this year. Now, the Jets last year traded the pick 170 that they got for picks 204 and 220, and the Packers this year traded pick 41 for picks 45, 168, and 190, and then utilized 190 to move up for Evan Williams. But here is the ultimate breakdown of what this ends up being. The Jets received Aaron Rodgers, Will McDonald IV, Carrick Bernard-Converse, and Zach Kuntz. That's what they ultimately ended up with once they utilized those draft picks. And after the trades, Aaron Rodgers, Will McDonald IV, Carrick Bernard-Converse, and Zach Kuntz. That's the Jets' haul of the deal. The Packers ended up with Lucas Van Ness, Luke Musgrave, Anders Carlson, Edgerrin Cooper, Jacob Monk, and then again, they used that pick 190 to help them move up for Evan Williams in the fourth round. So Lucas Van Ness, Luke Musgrave, Anders Carlson, Edgerrin Cooper, Jacob Monk, and a sliver of Evan Williams. That's what they ended up getting for Aaron Rodgers and in that entire trade. So that book is closed. That deal is officially done, and we know who everyone received in that deal. All right, finally, last but not least, the quick scouting reports from players on day 3. Let's start with Evan Williams. Attacking football player, very good blitzer, box safety with, you guessed it, versatility. There is the question of like where he could potentially play. I think if he does get the opportunity to start at safety across from Xavier McKinney, that could theoretically open up Javon Bullard to play in the slot. And that could be an interesting way to kind of go about it. But again, it just gives Jeff Hafley a lot more options. We'll see if Evan Williams can work his way into that role. I think it's just more likely that Javon Bullard is ultimately the starting safety across from McKinney. But if Evan Williams or if Kitano Oladapo or even an Anthony Johnson Jr. prove that they're ready to actually be a starting safety right now, it would give them a lot of versatility with how they want to use Javon Bullard. He's very instinctive. An Oregon staffer right after the draft texted Justin Mosqueda and said that the Packers got Oregon's best defensive player. Jim Nagy, as I mentioned from the Senior Bowl, said that multiple teams were hoping that he would fall to them in round 4. And he has a ton of special teams experience, 466 snaps, a gunner, multiple blocked special teams plays. I think he had a blocked punt and a blocked extra point, if I remember correctly. Does have some downsides, of course. His downside is his upside. I don't think that there is any legitimate high-end safety play here. I think the upside is as a good safety, but that's not the worst thing. Good safeties are good to have. A lot of missed tackles, lacks playmaking ability, and he really struggles in space. Jacob Monk, offensive lineman, watched a lot of the Clemson tape, had the opportunity to go back and watch some of his earlier stuff as well. Really fun player. Matched up with Peter Woods, who is a high-end prospect for Clemson, who's expected to be a future, potentially first-round pick. And I thought Jacob Monk handled him on a couple occasions extremely well. Monk is a 5-year starter, team captain, super versatile, high-end athlete, attacking offensive lineman, shows legitimate power, good anchor, and had the second best 10-yard split of any center at the combine. He did get announced as center, but I do think he can play some guard as well. The negatives: has a small size frame, short arms, had 20 penalties in his career. He may not have a lot of legitimate versatility. He might end up just having to be a center. Hand placement gets far too outside. It's a little bit similar to Jordan Morgan, actually, and is a little bit questionable what his upside could be as a center because of his shorter stance, his short arms, and just kind of the way he plays. He, again, might just have to be a center, and what type of level he can get to remains to be seen. And that the combination of short arms and poor hand placement can really get you into trouble. So he's going to have to really clean that up from a technique standpoint. Kitano Oladapo, very stiff-tipped, box safety only. That's what was my initial reaction to him watching. We'll see if he could potentially become a little bit more of that box or that post safety type. He will struggle to change direction and keep pace in the open field. Too many missed tackles. Looks the part of a box safety, as I mentioned. There's things to like on tape. Makes you want to take a chance on him. Good blitzer, team captain, previously played cornerback, lacked explosive traits, will turn 24 this year, and he will need to earn his keep on special teams. Travis Glover, positives, 5-year starter, a lot of power in his game. He's a people mover in the run game. Started at left tackle, right tackle, and left guard in college. He's a massive human being. He's an attacking player, and he really has great hand strength and grip strength that if he gets his hands on you, it's basically just over. He's going to win that rep. Negatives, footwork and hand placement need a ton of work. He will duck his head. His run blocking is ahead of his pass protection. He needs to play with much better leverage, and speed might just be something that always gives him issues if he ends up ever playing at tackle. That's why I think he probably ultimately needs to move to guard in the NFL, and I do think he probably moves to guard for Green Bay with maybe some tackle versatility. Michael Pratt, positives, 3-year captain, willing to step up in the face of pressure, make some business decision throws. He's mobile enough. He's an accurate passer, shows the ability to layer his throws. Still only 22 years old, ultra competitive, clean delivery, and ultra successful in college, setting team records, helping Tulane beat USC and Caleb Williams in their bowl game from a couple seasons ago. The negatives, he has a good arm, but definitely not a great arm. Needs to be more accurate within his completions, meaning he's accurate and he's throwing catchable balls, but a lot of times it's behind him, it's low, it's high. He needs to get accurate within those completions so that wide receivers have run after the catchability. The game gets a little bit too fast for him at times. I do think he has limited upside. Now, I think he has starting caliber upside, but we're talking like 31st, 32nd quarterback in the NFL starting caliber upside. Probably not much ahead of that, but he does have, I think, top backup quarterback upside as well. Takes too many big hits, and Matt LaFleur, like he had to do with Jordan Love, to get Jordan Love, ready to just trust what he sees and rip the ball. I think he's going to have to do a little bit of that with Michael Pratt as well. And last but not least, Kalen King. Positives, like I said, he was expected to be a first-round pick this time last year. His 2022 season was a lot more impressive. Shows the ability to play in phase with wide receivers, get his head turned and knock away passes. He was asked to be on an island, and because of that, in college, he will probably be able to transition into a more aggressive Jeff Hafley defense. He showed the ability to displace wide receivers at the line of scrimmage and press coverage. I think again, we talked about this earlier, but being a 7th round pick might be exactly what he needed to get him remotivated and playing at the level he needs to. He does have that cornerback swagger and a cornerback memory where when he gets beat, it's not going to affect him. And he does have 222 special team snaps in his career. The negatives, the 2023 tape completely fell off. He tested poorly, a 4.61 in the 40. He didn't do 3-cone or bench press. He did test well in the vertical jump, the broad jump, and the short shuttle, however. Questionable change of direction skills. His tackling needs improving. He doesn't have recovery speed, which is an issue if you're going to play as an aggressive press man corner. And there are some thoughts that at some point, if he can't get it together at corner and that foot speed becomes a problem, he may at some point need to transition to safety. All right, friends, that is going to do it for me today. Like I said, this weekend has been an absolute blast. We're going to have a ton of content coming out. Those deep dives are coming soon, and you are not going to want to miss those. As I mentioned, I put more time, effort, and energy into those than just about anything else because I really want you guys to get to know these players at an extremely high level. So those will be coming soon. Shout out to our brand new Pack a Day Podcast YouTube members, Steve Lobenstein, Scotty B45, Tim Solfest, Jack C22, and Jarrett Dahl. And shout out to our Hall of Fame and All-Pro members, Mo State of Minnesota, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Shea Bradad, Brandon Paletta, Boom Handle, Jennifer Wright, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Bremen, David Prendergast, Dan Miller, Alex Wang, and Arnoldo Espinoza. Appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for making this weekend so much fun. I'll see you soon, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.